Somewhere in your city right now, it's 300 a.m. and a parent is still awake. Everything has already been tried. The baby has been changed, fed, burped, rocked, and sung to. 47 different sleep training methods sit bookmarked on a phone. 3 parenting apps are sending conflicting advice. 8 or 200 smart bassinet promised to fix exactly this problem. And still, the baby cries. So here's a question almost nobody asks. What did ancient humans do when their infants wouldn't stop crying? Not Victorian parents with laudanum and wet nurses. Not medieval mothers with swaddling boards. Not even Romans with servants and extended households. We need to go back much further. 100,000 years, 200,000 years. To a time before books, before experts, before advice columns, before any concept of sleep training existed. Just an infant screaming into darkness, and a mother with no way to Google, "Why won't my baby sleep?" What we find changes everything we assume about infant crying, maternal instinct, and why modern parenting feels so brutally difficult. But first, did babies even cry the same way back then? This is genuinely debated among scientists. For decades, evolutionary biologists assumed infant crying was a universal constant, wired the same way across all of human history. A baby is a baby. Hunger hurts, cold hurts, babies cry. End of story. That assumption turned out to be badly mistaken. In 1977, anthropologist Melvin Konner published findings that upended developmental psychology. He'd spent years embedded with the Kung San people of the Kalahari Desert, the same group mentioned earlier, one of the last populations living close to humanity's original lifestyle. He wanted an answer to one question: how much do Kung infants actually cry? What he discovered, Kung babies cried, on average, under a minute per hour during daylight. At night, crying was almost non-existent. Now compare that to Western infants. Numerous studies across the US and Europe show babies crying anywhere between 1 and 5 hours daily, peaking around the 6-week mark. That gap isn't minor. It's a 300 to 400% jump in crying time. Identical species, identical biology, wildly different behavior. So the real question isn't only what ancient parents did, it's why modern infants cry so much more to begin with. Start with the obvious answer: they pick the baby up. Simple in theory, not in practice. In 1972, developmental psychologist Sylvia Bell and psychiatrist Mary Ainsworth ran a study at Johns Hopkins. 26 mother-infant pairs were tracked for a full year, with every cry and every response carefully logged. The study set out to test the era's dominant belief that responding too fast to a crying baby would spoil them, teach them crying works, and cause more crying overall. The findings said the opposite. Infants whose mothers answered quickly and reliably during the earliest months ended up crying far less by year's end. Babies left to cry it out, whose parents deliberately delayed, cried more, not less. Bell and Ainsworth's takeaway was unambiguous. Responsive care doesn't breed dependency, it builds security. And secure infants don't need to cry as much because they've learned their needs will be met. Here's what makes it more fascinating still. The Kung mothers Konner studied didn't just respond fast. They responded almost instantly, within seconds. And it wasn't just about answering cries. They held their infants nearly constantly. Kung babies spend roughly 90% of their first year in direct physical contact with another person. Not in a crib, not a bassinet, not a bouncer or swing or play mat. On a body. Skin against skin. Movement, breath, a heartbeat, always present. This wasn't a special technique. It wasn't attachment parenting as a philosophy. It was simply how humans lived for 300,000 years. In 1986, pediatrician Ronald Barr ran what's now known as the carrying study. 2 groups of Montreal mothers were compared. One was told to carry their infants at least 3 extra hours daily, crying or not. The other continued typical Western habits, picking babies up mainly once fussing started. The group that carried more saw crying drop 43% overall. During the peak fussy window near 6 weeks, crying fell 51%. Carrying didn't just calm babies after distress, it stopped the crying from starting. Because human infants, it turns out, are born expecting constant physical contact. Not occasional, constant. Consider this: human newborns arrive more helpless than nearly any other mammal alive. A foal can walk within an hour of birth. A fawn can outrun predators within a day. Even chimpanzees and gorillas are born able to grip their mother's fur immediately. Human infants can't even support their own heads. Anthropologists call this the obstetrical dilemma. As brains expanded across millions of years of human evolution, skulls grew too, but pelvises could only widen so far before upright walking became unworkable. Evolution's compromised human babies are born early, underdeveloped, more fragile than they should be. Effectively, every human infant arrives roughly 3 months premature compared to other primates, meaning for those first months, a baby's biology is still expecting to be inside the womb. The closest substitute is another human body, warm, moving, with an audible, steady heartbeat. When a 3-month-old is placed alone in a crib in another room with the door shut, that infant's nervous system reacts as it would 100,000 years ago. I've been abandoned to die. The crying isn't manipulation, it's a survival mechanism. And throughout the environment where humans evolved, it worked because someone was always nearby to respond. But ancient humans didn't just carry their infants, they shared the responsibility. In 2005, anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy released a book, Mothers and Others, that reshaped how researchers understand human child rearing. Hrdy, after decades studying primates and traditional societies, noticed something the standard mother-infant bonding model didn't account for. Human mothers across cultures and eras have always depended on others to help raise children. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, cousins, and unrelated women in the community. She named this alloparenting from the Greek word for other. Humans, it turns out, may be the most cooperative breeders on Earth. Among the Efe people of Central Africa, anthropologist Edward Tronick found infants pass between caregivers roughly 8 times per hour. By 18 weeks old, an Efe infant has been regularly cared for by around 14 different people. Far from neglect, this represents its opposite. A community of adults, all invested in the child's survival, all attuned to its needs, all able to soothe it. When a Kung baby cries, the response doesn't come only from the mother. It comes from whoever's nearest. An aunt nurses while the mother forages. A grandmother carries the baby so the mother can rest. An older sibling entertains near the fire while the adults talk. No single person shoulders the entire burden of infant care because no one was ever meant to. If this is landing for you, subscribe. The next part reshapes how you view modern parenting entirely. Here's what rarely gets discussed for 99% of human history. A mother was never alone with her infant for more than a few minutes at a stretch. The isolated nuclear family. One mother, one father, a couple kids behind a locked door is a social experiment barely 70 years old. Before the 1950s, most people lived in multi-generational households or close-knit communities where relatives and neighbors moved in and out constantly. In 1973, anthropologist Jane Lancaster surveyed child-rearing practices across 186 pre-industrial societies. In not a single one was the mother the sole caregiver. Yet modern Western culture places a woman alone with a newborn for 12 hours a day and calls it maternity leave. We expect her to manage. We hand her a book and a lactation consultant's phone number and say, "Good luck." Then we're surprised when postpartum depression rates climb. In 2015, Duke University researchers compared postpartum depression rates across cultures. Societies with robust support networks, where new mothers are surrounded by female relatives helping with the baby, showed dramatically lower rates of postpartum depression. In the US, postpartum depression affects roughly 15 to 20% of new mothers. Among the Kung San, it's nearly absent. This isn't a matter of different brain chemistry. It's that Kung women aren't attempting the impossible. A screaming baby at 3 a.m. in a suburban home, two exhausted parents both Googling. Is this normal? Both wondering what they're doing wrong. That's the abnormal scenario. The normal one, the one our species adapted to across 300,000 years, involves an infant who rarely cries because they're constantly held. And when they do cry, several people move to comfort them. There's one more practice ancient humans had that's nearly vanished: normalized nighttime parenting. Earlier we discussed humans historically sleeping in two segments. First sleep, then second sleep, with a waking interval between. But there was another reason people stirred at night: babies. In traditional societies, mothers sleep beside their infants. Not just in the same room, but the same bed, often for years. Anthropologist James McKenna, who runs the Mother-Baby Behavioral Sleep Laboratory at Notre Dame, has studied infant sleep for over 3 decades, using infrared cameras and physiological sensors to document what actually happens when mother and baby share a bed versus sleep apart. His findings were striking. When mother and infant sleep close together, their sleep cycles align. The baby's breathing, heart rate, and arousal patterns begin matching the mother's. She shifts into a lighter sleep stage, more tuned to the infant's needs. The baby wakes more often but briefly. The mother also wakes more often, yet barely recalls it by morning, since she never fully surfaces from sleep. Breastfeeding occurs in this half-conscious state. The baby latches, both drift back under, total wake time perhaps 90 seconds. No crying, no rising, no lights, no full wakefulness needed. McKenna contends that solitary infant sleep, what Western culture treats as standard, is a fairly recent cultural invention. For nearly all of human history, an infant sleeping alone would have faced real danger, so babies are wired to wake and cry upon finding themselves isolated. It's protective, not problematic. Modern guidance tells parents to lay the baby down, drowsy but awake, in a separate crib in a separate room, then leave. To an infant's nervous system, that reads as an emergency. In cultures where co-sleeping remains standard, Japan, much of Africa, indigenous communities across the Americas, parents don't really discuss sleep problems. The idea barely registers. Babies wake at night, naturally, you feed them, you both drift back off. It isn't a problem needing a fix. It's simply what infants do. Here's where things get even more interesting. Ancient humans didn't just accept nighttime parenting. Their whole relationship with night itself differed from ours. Remember, nobody, infant or adult, slept straight through. Night stretched long, dark, and shared. If an infant cried at 2 a.m., the mother wasn't isolated in a dark room, desperately trying to resettle the baby before her next workday. She was near a fire, surrounded by others awake or half awake. Someone could hold the baby a while. Someone could tell a story. Someone could sing. The load was spread across the group. The phrase, sleeping through the night, which consumes modern parents, simply didn't exist because the goal itself didn't exist. Nobody was engineering 8 uninterrupted hours of unconsciousness. People rested when tired and woke when needed. Infants fit that rhythm rather than disrupting it. So here's where this leaves us. 75,000 years ago, a mother carried her infant against her chest while gathering roots and berries. When the baby cried, she nursed. When she needed rest, her sister took over. At night, they lay side by side, breathing together, drifting through gentle, uncounted cycles of sleep and waking. 40,000 years ago, a father held his infant beside the fire while his wife took her first sleep. The baby fussed, and he rose and swayed. The same motion humans have repeated for millennia, mimicking walking, signaling to an infant's brain, we're moving, we're safe, we're together. Somewhere along the way, humanity built a world where a crying baby wasn't a crisis, just a baby, with hands always ready to hold them. Now fast forward to today. We place infants in cribs styled like baskets, in rooms designed to soothe, with white noise machines imitating the womb. apps tracking sleep cycles, books promising routines and schedules and solutions. We're trying to rebuild, through gadgets and products and advice, what used to be effortless and automatic. Simply other human bodies, present and responsive day and night. Here's what rarely gets said. Modern parenting isn't harder because today's parents are doing it wrong. It's harder because they're attempting something humans were never built to do solo. Every time someone says, "It takes a village," and you nod sadly because you don't have one, you're colliding with 300,000 years of human evolution. Every time your baby cries, and you feel you should be able to solve it single-handedly, you're working against biology. Every time you set your baby down and they scream and you wonder if something's wrong, nothing is. Your baby is doing exactly what human infants have always done when separated from the body they expect to be touching. They're calling you back. And every time you pick them up, even after being told not to, even after being warned you're forming bad habits, even while exhausted and doubting you can do it one more time, you're doing precisely what a mother in a cave once did. The same thing that kept infants alive through 300,000 years of predators, darkness, and cold. The same thing that built trust, security, and attachment, the foundation for language, cooperation, and civilization itself. You're answering the cry. The Kung have a saying, "A crying baby is one whose mother is too far away." Not a bad baby, not a manipulative one, not a baby needing an independence lesson. Just an infant who knows, down to the cellular level, that survival means closeness. We didn't lose our capacity to comfort our babies. We lost the village that once made doing so sustainable. But every time you hold your baby at 3 a.m., even alone, even exhausted, even as everything in modern life insists it shouldn't be this hard, you're not failing. You're doing what humans have always done. You've just been asked to do it in a world that forgot how much support it actually takes. The baby in your arms right now, crying, sleeping, or simply staring back at you, knows nothing of cribs or sleep charts or developmental milestones. They know only you. And for 300,000 years, that was always enough. Maybe it still is.